Yeah, maybe that's wisdom, I guess, that you gain. Realizing you're a lot dumber than you thought you were, and probably also a lot squishier and more vulnerable.
I like that as a philosophy. Wisdom is actually realizing how stupid you are. Or were.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, I would love to get into this because there's a ton of fun stuff to talk about. So I'll kick us off with a quick little intro, and then we'll just jump right in. Hello, and welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris. Eric has the day off, but joining me are our good friends Billy and Mark. Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going amazing. It's 4th of July, holiday weekend, and I'm really excited because today we're going to be talking about DM tips. And specifically the things that we've learned and the things that we apply for our session. And then also we want to give Mark a chance to ask any DM questions he might have, because Mark, you'll be running the 4th adventure in Candlekeep Mysteries. Oh fuck, what book is that? Do you know what that's called? That adventure?
Oh, I should. I have it written down somewhere.
Google, come to my aid. The Oracle.
In my first failure as a DM, I will not know the name of the adventure I'm running.
Well, you've also got a lot of time. Is it, book?
A Deep and Creeping Darkness?
That's it.
A Deep and Creeping Darkness. Yes. Book 4 in the Candlekeep Mysteries adventure book. So I think that'll give you a good chance to kind of get some of those things out of the way, and it might be just a fun way to prepare before running that game, because it's your first, like, you're running your first session it's a big deal. It's like a milestone in your D&D career. It's a ton of fun to switch gears and put on that hat. So I'm really excited to see what questions you have and for that game.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to run a game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know you're going to love it. And if you do what we have talked about, not that you have to or that there's any pressure, but if you do run it in that sort of Star Wars flavored universe, I feel like that'll put your skill set to excellent use, and either way, it'll be a good time. All right, well, let's jump into some of these topics. Bill, you've probably been DMing the longest out of all of us. What are some of the things that you do in terms of how you approach DMing, approaching the game, things that have worked really well for you to running efficient and effective sessions? And I guess by effective, I mean just fun for the players.
The main thing is preparation. I think that once you get there, we've talked about how to run the game when your friends are all at the table and how to keep things going and interesting. But a lot of the things we haven't talked about is preparation that you do beforehand. And so the main thing you have to worry about is how to keep things on track when you don't know what's going to happen. So you don't want to railroad people, but you also want to expect that they will do something unexpected. My initial preparation is always, what are the main elements that the party cannot miss or they have to do? And what are the different ways for them to do it? And then even if they think of a way that I haven't thought of, how do I, like a general, a catch-all maybe even, is like, if they don't, find this letter that leads them to the dungeon, they're never, you don't have an adventure. If you say, oh, they're going to find it from this guy, and then they just don't find it from that guy, you don't want to just say like, oh, well, you forgot this guy has it, and like make them loop back around. So you have to like think about, okay, well, if they don't find it here, maybe they'll just, have a runner find it, or they'll find another dead body where it's on there, or somebody is boasting about it that they're going to do this, or something like that. You always have to think about the alternates of how to maintain the general story while still anticipating that they will miss a crucial clue or not do what you expect them to do. Do something wrong, kill one of your NPCs accidentally or purposefully.
I think you can always assume that the party is going to do something that you haven't accounted for 100% of the time. Like, count on that. That's maybe like the only thing you can account for.
Yes, for sure. Especially if you know your party, and you know that some of them are not just goofballs, but they enjoy not breaking the system, but
But
the
exploring
freedom
it.
that the freedom that D&D employs, that you don't have, you're not limited to a list of the actions in the player's handbook. You can do whatever you want. Those are just common ones.
Yeah. And I think for preparation, you really hit something that's critical, and it's really understanding what to prepare. I know when I first started DMing, especially, I was very guilty of over preparing. And if you've got the time, that's fine. It's fun to just sink yourself into those worlds that you're, building and creating with your table. But if time becomes more precious to you, you really need to be you need more intentional about what you're actually preparing. So those major things of like, what does the character need, or what does the party need to achieve to move the story forward, and what are the ways that they can actually achieve that, they should be general and broad enough that they can, as Billy said, the party can, reach those outcomes in a number of different ways, or you can, as a DM, pop them into the story in a number of different ways. I think that's a tip that I've learned from you over the years, and I think it's an incredibly effective one. It's also just being like really focused on what you're spending time with preparing.
Completely agree. I think you can't never really. You can definitely over prepare, but the main issue if you over prepare is if you get disappointed when they don't do all of the things that you want them to do. Is if you prepare this grand story and all these things, and then first act or the first thing they go off on a tangent, and that's when you kind of feel like, what do I wrote this huge story and this huge backstory and this huge character that they just didn't even talk to. I want them to. So then sometimes it feels like you're forcing them to go back and participating in the story that you wrote instead of the story that everyone's writing.
Totally.
So yeah, I've been known to prepare too, but if you don't mind being disappointed by people not finding the clues or the treasures or the intricacies of the story, it's kind of like Bethesda.
Yeah.
And like the lore they put in their games, and then people just want to break the game.
Yeah.
Like how many actual books do they write for for Morrowind or Oblivion or Skyrim? Like, and who reads all of the books?
They're a very like 0.005% of the nerd population does. And yeah, you bring up a good, like, don't write a one-page description on the intricate carving of this elven banister leading up to, a foyer, when they're not even going to look at it. It's just unnecessary. Mark, I do want to take a second to pause, since we're moving through these topics. Do you have any like thoughts or questions about preparing as a DM, like how to prepare as a DM, like anything focused around that we could discuss right now?
Yeah. I think one kind of basic question that I always wonder is how much, how much do I need to understand of the game as a whole? I'm not super experienced, so like how much of the reference materials and tools do I really need to have, or for example, like monster manuals, the player handbook. I know a lot of that stuff's online as well, but like how important is that versus like, do adventures come kind of with the details you need?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Billy, do you want to take that one?
Sure.
What are your thoughts? I guess we could both answer, but
yeah,
you go first.
I'll go. You don't really need a lot of stuff to be a DM. You don't need most adventures that you find online or that you buy from Wizards will have the creature stat blocks. Most of the important creature stat blocks, and the ones that aren't, you can just Google. They'll have most of the information that you will need for that particular encounter or that particular campaign. And for like the details, nobody memorizes everything. I don't memorize everything, and I can be wrong because you could be, I can get 3.5, 4, 5, and other games I've played mixed up, and that's not unheard of. And so one of the best tools is your other players. If you have a question, you ask them. Like if somebody says, okay, well, this spell, and now they're enthralled. Like, okay, cool. What does that mean? Like, tell me what that means. Or, if they're now, restrained, which is a common one. You just tell them, okay, what does that mean? But in general, the tools that I would have, I like the monster manuals because everything's compact. You can find all that information anywhere, especially online. The DM guide is very useful, but that's more for like world building, and if you're building your own campaigns, you don't really need it if you're running a book campaign. I mean, there are definitely useful information in there, and if you haven't bought it, you should have it, but you don't really need to keep it by your side when you're running the campaign. That's not like a quick reference guide because it is deep. One of the things that may get lost when playing online or through things that not at the same table is the DM. They make DM screens that basically have all the information that you need at your fingertips. So they'll talk about conditions. They'll talk about quick reference items. So even if you don't have one and you don't need to have one in front of you when you play online, you can find a DM screen if you Google it. It's a lot of times they're just like somebody made them. They're like 4 pieces of paper that you glue to a folder, which is what I did. I have 2 manila folders, so it's like a four sheets, and I made my own. Haven't used it in years because I haven't played face to face in a while. But
yeah, your DM screen is like OG legit.
I think there's an old picture of that on my Instagram. We need to put that on the website.
Yeah,
the one, and I drew on my manila folders with my terrible art skills. Yeah, I'm the absolute least artistic person of all of our friends, because you both are legitimate artists, and I am, a math guy. I can't do, you want me to draw with a spirograph, I could probably handle that, but I'm not an artist. But it was still fun. There's a terribly drawn dragon and some other shit on my manila folders.
So it doesn't matter. It's fun, and you enjoy it, and we enjoy it, and that's what really matters.
It's fun. But that's what I would say is I recommend if you're going to do more DMing and you're interested in it and you want to maybe write your own campaign, to get those items, because then they're very useful. But if you're just going to DM a pre-written campaign here and there, you can use all the information that we can the internet has to offer, or definitely GM or DM forums online. There's a lot of questions that I ask that are a little bit iffy in the rules, and I'll just Google it, and usually there's a hot discussion, but in general there's a lot of times a consensus. So those are useful. But I would think when in the act of playing the game and the actual session, get like 3 or 4 pages of quick reference stuff, maybe like on a PDF that you can scroll between, and that's really all you need. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, honestly, I think you hit everything I was going to say, so I don't want to repeat that. As you're prepared, I recommend for any new DM to run a pre-written adventure. And there's so many reasons for that. It just gives you all of the tools that you need. Having some kind of quick reference guide on the side is incredibly helpful. Outsourcing to your players, especially Mark. I mean, I think you'll have hopefully we can make your DM session, your first DM, experience easier, just because we have all been playing for so long and we know the rules. And that'll be, it'll be a way to kind of streamline things. Do you have any other questions about that, Mark? Is there anything that you're still unsure about that you're like, well, I'd love to kind of figure out this? Because one of the things I needed help on was just how much to focus for when you think about game time and sort of how long game time passes, and you get more familiar with that the more you play. but like
Right.
I only need to really prepare maybe a page or two at a time. Now the adventures in Candlekeep are really short and like maybe 3 pages total for some of them. Like, but looking at the adventure after you read it and kind of get familiar with the basics, really you only need to know, an hour or two worth of content to really be prepared for the session. And that's kind of what I focused on, was just getting ready for the session. Like I'm only focused on the next 2 hours. I don't care, and I'm not going to waste my time with anything else outside of that.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's one thing I was wondering about was just, I'll probably read through it all multiple times just to try to wrap my head around it. But I feel like we do pretty well just as a group of being like, this seems kind of like a good resting point in the story to take a break. So that's really good information to know.
Yeah, and don't be, as the DM, don't be afraid to make those calls. Don't be afraid to use the story that's given as a guideline and then change whatever you want to make it fit what's happening. I mean, in the first adventure we ran, there were some things that, just because of the nature of the story and the actions of the party that pivoted, and, it was seamless to the game, but we talked about it afterwards, but like, don't be afraid to make those calls too. Like, the written adventure is just a framework, and you get to insert all of your creativity and adapt to the party's creativity as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting parts to me, is just having all those little options and kind of making stuff up on the fly when needed. You want to do it well, but like you said, not be so over prepared that it's not like a living game. Like, we do this because it's not a video game. We could all do that as well, but it's just more free and fun. And I feel like that's what I like about storytelling in general.
Yeah, keeping it more free form, and really, we Billy and I both said outsource the rules to your players. I would also, want to take that a step further, and I think we do in our games. Outsource the campaign and the game to your players too. Even if you're writing, or even if you're running these pre-written adventures, there's still a lot of room for creative world building and creative, world interaction and engagement within those pre-written structures, especially if you're sort of reflavoring and reskinning the game like we did with the last one. I felt like there was a ton of creative freedom and liberty that we were able to take, even though we were playing within like restrictions.
Yeah. Well, and that's one question I had, is like, obviously running a game, you are more or less responsible for the framework and the rules or whatever. So how do you guys deal with like the situations that I know have happened when I've been playing, where it's like, okay, this, gelatinous blob is kicking some major ass and no one expected that, without like diluting the challenge of the adventure to where it's like not fun anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if it looks like the party's going to wipe or someone's going to die, like from a crazy encounter that they weren't expecting, how much of that do you flex before it's just kind of like, everybody always wins and it's easy mode?
Yeah,
this is not as entertaining.
It's an interesting question, because I usually err on the side of like wanting to protect the party in those situations. You're
a benevolent god.
Yeah, and again, like, I don't view the DMs like as a elevated role. I view them as like an arbiter and an engine, a game engine essentially, but one that I just like, I can't. Like, you guys are my friends. I don't want your character. I love your characters. I don't really want to see your characters come to a grisly demise. So I'm gonna let Billy add his thoughts, because I struggle with this one, because I know that I put on kid gloves sometimes during those situations, or give like an out. So, Billy, do you want to add your thoughts on that?
Sure. So, if you're getting your butt kicked by a monster that you weren't expecting them to get their butt kicked by, there are really two ways that that's going to happen. And it could be a mixture of both. Either the creature's gotten incredibly lucky on their rolls, or the players have done some stupid mistakes. So in the first instance, I don't think it's fun that if you can do everything right and it just things don't go your way. And I understand that that's part of the game, but it's not fun. It's not fun that you're playing right and this monster just keeps critting and you're just not doing great.
Yeah, it's just a probability, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So that's when you can pull your punches a little bit. I don't like having the savior come in and just and he decides to leave, or something like that, or something happens. You want them to think that they, even with all this bad luck, they survived by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah, and they had some control over that.
And they had some control. So things weren't going their way, but then they turn it out at the end with some lucky crits or some lucky, fumbles or whatever you call, just some bad luck at the end on the monsters rolls. And that's, they don't see what you're rolling, so you could always just decrease it a little bit. Every once in a while, just turn a hit into a miss. If you do it all the time, it's pretty obvious. And if you turn misses into hits because you want to hit the party, that becomes, then you're not really playing by the rules. But at a crucial time or a random time, I have just, especially if it was close and it's right on the line, I've just, dropped the number a little bit. Especially if you know what their AC is and you ask them okay, does, their AC is 18. You're all right, you got, does a 17 hit? And they're no. And you're yes. You do something like that. All right, barely misses
really
you.
harrowing for them.
Yeah. But if they did it by their own mistake and and they're just doing stupid things, it's a gelatinous monster and he runs in with his sword, starts swinging, and they should know that you don't do that. Let them fail. That's consequences of their actions, because that is a demise from their own doing.
Yep.
And even if it does harm the party, you can you could have the one character that does something stupid, have him get killed, and then then you just say all right, he seems to be sated, he has a dead body now, he doesn't seem to be going after you anymore. And then it's a natural way that you punish the person who made a mistake without punishing the whole party. That he swallowed that warrior, and he's he doesn't have any more room to digest. He's happy. He doesn't, he stops advancing.
It's fibrous.
And
that fibrous fighter.
Yeah, and you're just, there you go.
Or
that's
make them be prisoners. They wipe, and depending on the encounter, now they're these bugbears prisoners.
Yep.
And then lesson learned.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a pretty common one. If especially if a new overeager party tries to do something, and then they have to, you kind of slap them on the wrist, give them a prison escape, and then they're the more wary in the future. One would hope, but you never know.
Yeah, you can always turn that into a hook. Yeah, where if something happens, you can say now they're indebted to somebody. They had something happened and this person or this thing saved them or didn't kill them, especially if it's humanoid characters that have intelligence, then it's a huge hook that not only do you have to complete this story, but now you have you have to do this side mission, or these people, they're holding something of yours hostage, or now something like that. It's a good opportunity for a hook. But yeah, I don't like to hold punches, and if you notice I'm holding punches, then I'm doing my job bad.
Yeah.
Because that's the only reason that you would start feeling that you're invincible or that it doesn't matter, is if you know that the DM's holding punches. So hopefully you haven't really, taken what I have and just are going to start looking out for that stuff, because I don't do it very often. It very rarely, does it. One die roll can change a battle. So it could. You never know when that one die roll that is that a crucial miss, or did I factor into that? I couldn't. I'm not going to tell you how many times I've done it. But I have done it in the past before.
Yeah, and I think that's a skill too that you just become more comfortable with the more you DM and the more you play. You just kind of have a better intuition into it. I do want to circle, but so I agree with you that there's two buckets. I think that's a really good dichotomy to kind of break it down into. For that first bucket, the players are doing everything that they can. Their rolls are unfortunate. I want to hone in on that because I feel like as a DM, you do have some tools that you can just kind of remind your players of or bring into the game to help them through the situation, but in a way that's not that kind of contributes and adds more fun to the combat without necessarily putting on the kid gloves. And that's like reminding them that they have inspiration if they have it. If that's something that you're using in the game, that could be one way that can give them a huge, like rolling with advantage. The more you can emphasize that, that's a huge boost to your output. So, or giving them other chances to roll with advantage if they're clever with their tactics. I always like to use that as kind of a simple reward to kind of give them a boost, or let them know that there's some environmental hazards that they might be able to integrate into the battle that might help them, or remind them, hey, don't forget that you guys can use cover. 3/4 cover gives you +5 to your AC if someone's getting hit a lot, to kind of circumvent that. So those are some tactical things that a DM can use to make sure that the party is using their elements.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, I think both of what you guys just said is making me realize that, this seems obvious now, but I guess I've been thinking maybe of like the story and plot and combat as kind of different parts of the same whole. But I think what I just learned is that like the interaction between the two can, be different and changed. And like, I never once considered, like what happens if the enemies stop and capture you, or, stuff like that. That's super interesting to me to just now be realizing how those can like interplay, and it's not just like Pokemon or something where you have the fight and then there's a whole another thing going on.
Yeah, not every lost battle means the end of the campaign. Like if you think about it, you're all these high level adventurers and you're fighting a band of rogues and a band of bugbears, and you're saying that nobody and any of those people have ever lost a fight. Every one of them is, it's 20-0. They've the only ones that survived are the ones that won. No, you can lose a fight and you get wiped, but you're unconscious, and they're not there they think you're dead, or they leave. You can lose a fight.
Yeah,
it's like so much less linear than I was thinking, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then if that happened, like take all of their stuff. If you just let them and they're naked and they have to start over, basically, like that's a fun way to kind of move on from that. Like take your lickings and dust yourself off and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're switching from like the gaming world into the tabletop gaming world, everything's a lot more nebulous and things kind of can flow together more organically. So yeah, don't be just really, that's what I love about it, is that you can immediately pivot in game, and that pivot could be completely seamless to the players. Only and you have like, there's a secret DM satisfaction when that happens. And it's kind of fun to share and talk about like post game, but just don't be afraid to take full control and make those decisions when you need to. All right. Well, we've talked a lot about preparation. What else do you guys want to cover? Billy, do you have any other like major...
Something that you're going to run across as a DM? It's inevitable. You don't want to think about it, but when you make a mistake and you don't catch the mistake till later, that's a big thing that it's going to happen. And how do you get over it in that I've been adding this up wrong, or I've been giving you way too much for this monster. I've been giving them +4 to his attack roll when he only gets that on special occasions. He doesn't get it every round, or something like that. There's a million different ways that you could just misread a stat block or a description, and players will do it too, and they just assume like, oh no, I can do this, and oh man, I shouldn't have been able to do that all this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these things have happened in our games for sure.
Yeah, so retconning is the worst thing in the world, so I'd take retconning off the table. That because nobody wants to go back and redo things or reevaluate unless it was the same round. If it's once that round is done, it's like chess. You take your hand off the piece, no takesies backsies. So I think one way to do it is just admit if you're the DM and you made a mistake, you just tell them like, hey guys, actually I'm looking at this, I made a mistake. This shouldn't have been that hard, or you made a mistake. I shouldn't have been doing this, and no one's going to be that mad at you because I'm sure everybody else has made a mistake, and just avoid that in the future, and it gains the trust of your players when you just tell them that you made a mistake. I understand that the GM is the god, and you in theory you could make no mistakes. If you wanted that to +4 and that's the way you said it, you could make it that, say it is so and it is so. But it's a little bit more that trust that you have with the players, that I wasn't out, I made a mistake, but I wasn't out to get you, or especially because if they'll catch it later and they're like, hey man, you totally screwed that up and you almost killed my character.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It would, because I'm bound to do that, but it kind of piggybacks off of what Chris was saying. Like, the players, your table's a resource, and everybody could help kind of keep accountable or watch out for those kind of mistakes later on, so that way the party doesn't wipe accidentally because of miscounting some bonus rolls or something.
My big thing is like, be flexible but consistent. That's kind of like my rule of thumb with that type of stuff. Like, if we're trying to figure out in the moment, okay, we'll figure out, and then that's we're agreeing that this is what we'll do, and then we just kind of stick to that from now on.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's especially if there's not really a rule, it's on the fence. Do you guys want to do this? You guys not want to do this? Yeah, I agree. Be consistent, and also even if it's in the same battle, you could say like, okay, for the end of this battle, we'll keep doing it this way, but then we'll change. So it's not in the middle of combat. You're changing because somebody did something and they were able to benefit to the broken rule or the mistake rule, and then somebody else wants to do it, and then you're like, oh wait, I see now that you shouldn't have been able to do that. And I was like, but this guy did it. It's not fair. You don't want to get that things like, okay, well, you can do it because they did it, or starting from now, this is how we're going to do it. But I understand. We will give you that opportunity to do it.
Yeah, well. That makes total sense.
Managing PCs sounds like managing a bunch of children.
Is that?
But Johnny, you sneak attack twice in a round. Why can't I?
Absolutely. It is. Everybody wants your character to be the hero. Not very many people like to be like a true support staff where you just sit and you assist other. Like, some people really love it and it's fun, but people like doing that kill and blow or doing a lot of damage or doing something cool. It doesn't have to be damage, but they like your character to be the active. That's when you have a character that is just failing on all counts. You feel bad for the player that has that character because everybody else is doing cool stuff around him, and he's just like, I want to try this, failed. I want to try this, fail. And he's just like, I was useless that encounter. Like, and you get a lot of those times where it's just like, yeah, man, well, that's how it goes. But if it happens all the time, then you want them to feel like important, like they are contributing to the whole, not just the story, but the combat as well.
Yeah, that actually is a good segue into the next point I wanted to talk about. And it's like, as a DM, when you're getting ready for the game, we've talked about preparation for the campaign, but I think a really good DM knows the characters, knows their motives and their flaws, their backgrounds, and hopefully is a fan of the characters, because really the game revolves around the characters. The game doesn't revolve around the DM. It's not the DM's game. The players are the ones who really, the the heroes of the story of the journey. So the more you know about them and the more you can bring their stories and things that are going to make the game interesting for their characters, the more they're going to have fun, the more you're going to be, kind of lauded as the DM, because you're going to have a lot more fun seeing your players enjoy it. So that's the next thing I want to talk about, is just sort of, what do you do, Billy, to kind of get into the characters? What do you do to try and bring... What do you do to try to make the story or the game interesting for the characters? I guess for the players vis-a-vis the characters.
Good question. I like to pull out few interesting tidbits from each character that I can just subtly reference in stories. So if you write a campaign, or you're playing a written campaign and they have, this church, one of your guys is a paladin, you just change it to his church, and that's just like a little nod. It's almost like everybody loves those little references, especially with your character. It's incorporating their backstory into the greater story, and it's really fun. So just make little changes, make little, edits. So if you have like a villain or like a criminal, and one of your guys has a guy that he's feuding with in the background, make that feuding guy, make the criminal that feuding guy, just change his name, or things like that. And I think that's really, really fun, and people love to do it. And you just grab, every character has like 2 or 3 little nuggets that you can pull out from their backstory, their family, or where they're somebody that they trained with, or the church they belong to, or things like that, and you just incorporate them when you can.
Yeah, and I'll give you a very concrete example of like how you could do this. In the first Candlekeep game that we played, when you guys were like exploring around and sort of through the Arboretum, there's in the book there's not really like anything that you can find in there, but Levo was a scrounging survivalist, and so kind of led a path where she could search and maybe find some useful regents, which actually came in handy at the end of the story, because there wasn't like a necessarily clear path to save Professor Matrius after he was attacked by the imp. So like, just by knowing that the character is a scavenger, when they're in an environment that is kind of conducive to their skill set, giving them a little moment to kind of do something about that or do something with that in game could give like a storytelling reward, or could give actual in-game reward. In this case, some chamomile flowers or something. But that's like a way in game that I try to deploy those things to keep the players interested and keep them exploring. Like, I want you guys to explore every nook and cranny, even if it's not written. Like, I'll make some stuff up and give some cool rewards and hide some cool rewards in there. But that's kind of that collaborative world building that I like to talk about. So yeah, for sure. Like, give every character a chance to be in the spotlight for 2 minutes. But let everybody have that chance. So yeah, this is where I can incorporate one of my, my skills or my background or my flavor things. Like, just have them, even if it is a side step from the story, or if it's not written, or exactly like he said, you go into a room and you find something that's relevant to your character, does not actually have any value. It's not like you're giving them more treasure or gold or weapons. They could find like an old item from, something that they are trying to do. Like this guy, like and further your character's motivation and not just the campaign motivation. So if your character is trying to find his sister, you could have maybe a hint that maybe, it doesn't have to be like direct, like, oh, this is a letter from my sister in this random thing, but it could just be like a hint in, that maybe they're taking
slaves. There was like a slave trader, and he's like, oh, this could be, relevant to your character, something like that.
Mark, what are your thoughts? Do you have any kind of questions about that in terms of, from a DM's perspective, bringing the characters, their backgrounds, their motives, or just kind of like their personalities into the story, or like how to look out for that stuff? Because I know it's like a lot to manage. You're managing the campaign, the characters, the rules. There's just like a lot to keep track of. So it can be tough and overwhelming.
Yeah, actually, that was one of my top questions, was just, how much time or depth to go into learning the characters that are going to be in there. So that answered a lot of that, I think.
And I want to like take 1 second to pause. I pay very little attention, to be honest, to the stats of the characters. I'm paying more attention to like the stuff they write about the character. Like I want to make sure that this character sheet's correct. That's important. Edit each other's work. But the stuff I'm really paying attention to is like, what do they write about their, backgrounds, ideals, bonds, flaws, history, story, all that stuff. I want to know more about that.
Yeah. That's why writing that stuff is important. When people that just make it and they just make it up, or it's not important to them, but it's important to the story. Yeah, I really only keep 2 things of each character. I want to know your AC, and I want to know your passive perception, because that's stuff that's relevant. Everything else, you'll tell me what it is.
Yeah.
If you're going to roll, tell me. If you are doing the active roll, you're going to tell me what it is. But the passive perception, I can't tell you that I'm comparing it, so I need to know that. And in AC, it makes more sense, because if you're, and you'll learn that on your own, but just makes it easier. So when you're battled and be like, okay, he misses or he hits you, you don't have to ask like, okay, what's your AC? Did this hit?
Yeah, it also goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you do need to kind of soften the numbers a little bit, having to ask, like, ooh, like when you do this, like wince with the roll, and they're like, what's your AC? And then they're like 17, and then you have to make that decision. That's when you kind of know the DM's pulling punches.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And also I feel like it makes it a lot easier to, let them players manage their, weapons and all that stuff, and then focus more on the background and whatnot.
Yeah. And then like generally when I'm playing, I take notes, like what you guys are doing.
Yeah. That was another question I had.
Yeah. So my advice when taking notes is just take smart notes on the player's actions, their interests, and kind of what they're doing, just so you can, keep that fresh in your mind. I like to do a recap before every session, but other DMs, I've seen advice of just like let the players recap, and you can kind of fill in the gaps. I think both are great approaches. But just having good notes allows the DM to make sure that the interactions that happen or the order of things that happen, you can just keep track of that stuff. But I tried not to overwhelm myself with notes. I usually just do like shorthand stuff.
For sure. I think it's a good thing to say, okay, where did we leave off last time? Or what happened last time? Ask that as a question. And then if they get something wrong or they forget something, like, no, I think you also did this, or you also found that other thing. Because you don't want to find an important piece of paper and then at the end of the last session and everybody's like, okay, checked out. And then they come back and they forgot that, oh no, we found that very vital, clue. But
yeah. I think doing it that way too, like letting the players drive the recap, from a DM's perspective, it lets you know what their focus is, like what they remember, because that's really what sticks. They're going to bring up what's most important or most relevant to them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So I think there's a lot of value in doing it that way, because then, to Billy's point, you can kind of fill in the gaps. If they've missed something critical, you can kind of come in with a reminder. But that really gives you a clear perspective of the party's like viewpoint, like where they're at. I actually don't take notes anymore because we record all of our sessions now and I edit them. So like my notes are just editing each podcast episode when we play, or each live play episode when we play them. So that's really handy. Yeah. So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to. I do want to talk about pacing. And I think this applies for new DMs and veteran DMs, of just, how to keep the actually, I want to focus on two things here. I want to focus on keeping the story moving, but one of the biggest challenges that I have sometimes is where to start the adventure, especially if you're writing your own and you don't want to do the whole tavern thing. New DMs, I think it can be overwhelming to figure out, like, how do we thrust the party into the adventure? So Billy, do you want to jump in with some, like, we'll start with that, kind of how you bring the party in and kind of get the adventure kickstarted, or what's your philosophy or principle for beginning adventures?
It's a good topic because there's a bunch of different ways to do it. And I think there's no wrong way as long as it's done with that involves everybody. So one of the easiest ways, you can ask them how they know each other and make them write that part of the story of why are you guys together. That's maybe the simplest way, and then you can, based off of that, you can see like, oh, we're an adventuring party. Like, okay, well that's easy enough. Like, oh, we're all just in this inn, and then okay, how do I get you guys involved, or something like that. You get them to determine if they know each other, and if they do know each other, how they know each other. You could write it into the story. Like if you know everybody's background, you can use their background to kind of create a hook that is compelling enough. No, at the start of the adventure, not too many people would be like, okay, you find a guy comes over to you and asks him to do something. No, people are like, I choose no. Like they know that that's the hook, and if they say no at the very beginning, you're not going to do anything. So as long as it's a compelling hook that you write for their character, but using their character's information, I've never had anybody like argue. And if they say, oh no, I wouldn't do that, I want to do this, okay, well then we'll change it. Like you're involved. So it's tricky, but as long as you all agree on it, and you can alternate between ways, like this time you guys are an adventuring party. So tell me, why are you an adventuring party? Or you guys don't know each other, or something like that. That's there's no wrong way, I think, as long as everybody is in agreement. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I think like outsourcing it to your party once again is a great idea, because it's they're the ones who are going to be banded together. So let them kind of forge that or form how they're going to be brought together as a group. I think that's a great way to start. Don't, as a DM, especially if you're writing your own adventures, don't be necessarily so fixated or so tied to one thing. Allow the players to have that creative freedom.
I think another good way is to, if it is like a big adventure, you could always have like a party manager, which is always fun because we have like your party's promoter or manager, and he's the one who formed the party. Like, okay, well, we need somebody with, you have a rogue. We're like, oh, we need somebody for infiltration. So, I got, this is, what's his name? And then you introduce yourself, Nighthawk, Ravenblade, or whatever name that guy's would be, oh, and then we need, here's the muscle, and then we need somebody else. Like, so have that promoter, he's the one who forms the party. And so they don't really know who they are, but now they're introducing themselves. And then you have like a kind of a cool character that can kind of be reoccurring, especially if they're reoccurring characters, that like he's the hook that brings them together, but it's like a fun NPC that like you never have a problem with introducing a new adventure because it comes through your party manager.
Yeah, and you did that for one of the games that we had played via Roll20, which was a ton of fun.
Yeah,
and you brought a fun character into the mix, so it was kind of like the Charlie's Angels. You have the, or what was it, Zordon for Power Rangers?
Yeah,
there's always like the organizer. He's not out on the missions, but he's willing to send these these young teenagers into certain doom in order to fight off whatever monster of the week is coming their way.
At least in this, like the adventuring parties are like rock bands. There's really high level ones, and then there's garage bands, and that's kind of how I
We fall into the garage band category.
Yeah, so like if you're level 4, level 3, level 5, you're probably in a garage band. Maybe you're just playing like gigs at the local level. And they in the DM guild they talk about like consequences, like level 1 to 5, it's like you're solving a problem for a city, then it's for a kingdom, then for a region, and then like when you're like level 15, you're solving you're saving the world basically. And that's kind of how it is. Like, you don't start out being, the Rolling Stones touring, internationally. You're doing gigs at the bar, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're literally doing gigs at the local tavern.
You're
for
still
pay.
tumbling pebbles at that point.
Yeah, and so like once when you're level 1, you probably don't have a manager, but once you get like level 4 or 5, introduce that manager. And it's like, hey, I've seen you guys do. I don't know why this guy has this voice now, but he does. Like, I've been watching you guys, and you guys are doing pretty good. So I was thinking, you help me, I help you. I get, let's say 10%, 15%, 20%, something like that, and I give you interesting jobs that you don't really need to know where they come from. Like, you just have a character that, and he's fun and never-ending supply of where the things come from, and you don't even have to use him. Sometimes it could be somebody else with him, and then it's like, do we cut him in? Do we cut our manager in? We didn't get this mission from him, and he's finding out, I heard you taking freelance work. I don't appreciate it,
Ooh, then you can create some division.
Yeah.
I like the idea of being able to have to like level up to getting a manager. I think that's fun, especially if you're playing kind of that kind of campaign where it's like, yeah, we just want to do like a series of one shots and fun, like just keeping it loose. That's a great way to kind of keep the fun rolling, but also have like that progression too. I think I really like that tiered system. Mark, I've got so for this thing, I've got like, I think a good analogy for you. Since you work in videography, I kind of like the DM is in terms of like a production, he's your director.
Mm-hmm.
And so like whenever you're starting a story, you're basically bringing the camera to wherever the action is. So like if it's just like all of a sudden it's a goblin fight because you guys are in a bar, or like marauders, if you start like with a combat encounter or something big like that, whatever it is, bring the camera to that action. That can be a way to just start the hook or start the story. It's just you start where the action is.
Yeah.
And then as you're going through the journey or the adventure, I guess like one of the things as a DM is like you have to move the camera around and like set the scene. And so kind of knowing when to do that and kind of when to like, all right, this scene is over, let's push on to the next scene, and then kind of think of those transitions and stuff. Thinking of it that way and that storytelling aspect has helped me kind of keep the pacing of the game and like keeping it moving. And even just like sometimes when you get stuck on where to start, just like, where do all movies start or where do all stories start? They start at that critical point, or any good story does.
That makes a lot of sense.
And if you work with your players, you can, even if you have one player that you think is interesting to do, you could have like, let's say, have 3 players and 2 of them seem like they would know each other, the third doesn't. You start the combat with just the 2, and then in the middle of the combat, all of a sudden an arrow flies by, and out of the woods steps this elf, and then you let this guy introduce it. Just like you see an elf, and what does he look like? Like, and then you let the character, like, he's whatever, he's 6 foot whatever. And so like that's not bad to get that to work with your players to get that hook at the beginning, because that's always like a cool thing that when you start, and if you just start with 2 character combat and the other player is just sitting there like not doing anything, like people are like, okay, what's happening? I don't know. And then he steps in. And then after that combat, everybody's at the same level. Like, you looped them in on that one initial combat, and then now they're together and they have a story of why they were together, and you let them take it from there. I think that's really cool. They think of it as like a director. I always thought it as a narrator, but I think director is a better analogy because the director does have a little bit more control. A narrator's just telling the story, a director is telling the story and has some ability to control where the story goes.
Yeah, totally.
Even if you're in a phase of the game where the players themselves are exploring, you can shift the camera there too. Like if they're exploring an area and one player has done some stuff and the other players you haven't heard from in a while, shift the camera. Okay, well, what's Cammy doing right now? Levo's off, sniffing in this corner. What's Teruvian doing while she's doing that? And you can shift the camera to make sure each one of the characters is getting the appropriate amount of screen time, or even in dialogue sessions. Okay, this person's interact now. He's going to interact with this other person to kind of bring them in. So that's another way that I kind of view it as like making sure I'm moving the camera around where it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
One I feel like we have to mention, but I don't want to talk about that much because we have a whole episode on it. It's running a 0 session. 0 sessions are great because you can kind of set the expectation of the campaign. You can kind of iron out a lot of the stuff that we talked about in terms of character dynamics, party dynamics, where the story is going to begin, the setting. We do a lot of this stuff just via Facebook. And ours, we've been playing for so long together. Ours is more or less truncated. But running that 0 session gives you a chance to iron out a ton of stuff ahead of time to make that game session, especially that first session, run a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, my first thought was I need to go back and listen to that episode.
Hopefully there's some solid content in there. I hope there is. It's one of my favorites because I really love 0 sessions and I think they're really important. But yeah, we have the benefit of just like we've played so long together that a lot of the stuff is kind of just done with mutual understandings, but there's still some stuff I think in there that could be helpful. But Billy, do you have any thoughts on just 0 sessions in general or like major things to cover there that you'd want to talk about?
No, I mean, you covered it all in the episode. It's extremely important, especially if you're bringing in, even if it's just one new person, so that you're all on the same page. If you've been playing, with the same party for 20 years and you're inviting one new person, you need to get that 0 session in just so, so that guy knows, and you're familiar with his play style, he's familiar with yours, you know what you want, you know what you get familiar with the characters, get familiar with all that, not just a character, but the player and things like that. But and it's in. Even if you've played each other forever, it's also fun because then you can go into, sneak peek behind character development, like, oh, I made this character, oh, but this is why I did this, it's and then you can focus on, when people talk about their characters, a lot of times you can see what part they really like, and then that's the part that you highlight. So as a DM, like you're kind of use it to spy, like, okay, he really thinks this part of his character is cool, so that's the part I'm going to highlight or I'm going to bring out.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is just being a good listener, like listening to what the players get excited about and then making those mental notes or writing that stuff down, like Billy said, and just like really being in tune with what's sparking them, which can be tough too, especially online. But if you can just kind of be a perceptive listener and then kind of align your actions with what the party's, desires and goals are, I mean, you can't go wrong there. At this point, I want to focus on any questions Mark has, any outlying questions that we didn't cover or things you want to talk about before. I mean, you've got some time before you run that game, but I think it's cool to have this conversation now and kind of get you prepped and excited for when you do run your game.
Yeah, I'm a lot more excited actually.
Hooray.
Having heard more about how you guys do it. I mean, I had like a list of questions and you guys have like pretty much nailed it, but there was one just like in-game practical thing that I've always kind of wondered about, and that's the ability checks. So is there like, how much of that is just you deciding, or is there, like, does the DM handbook literally say, like, if you need to sneak, you do this type of check? Or is that part of the storytelling where you're like, choosing whether somebody uses the different abilities to make something happen?
This is a fun question. I think we might have. Well, I don't know, Billy. You go first. I think it'll be interesting to see what both of our responses will be for this.
There are some guides, and I know that some of them are in the DM, the DM guide on about the difficulty for certain checks based on what you're trying to do. Some of them are pretty obvious, like for climb checks, based on the wall type or what it is. There's a set skill. Same thing for locks, based on how hard the lock is, and you could just determine it. That's more for you. Like if you think it's a harder lock, you make the DC harder.
And this is where those reference documents come in. Like, you have that stuff on the side.
Yeah, and it's just like a hard, because that like for your average person, like 5 to 10 for a skilled person should be like 75% chance. So if they have a +5, and it's a 10, a DC 10 check, that should be 75% chance, because it's anything 5 or higher is going to be a success. So that's what you kind of got to think about if you're making your own and not using the guides. Some of those skills are I forget the exact word, but you're rolling against somebody else. So for perception and sneak,
it's like a challenge.
It's a it's a challenged roll, or they call it something where
contest.
Yeah, a contest, a contested roll. And those, it's based off the other character. If he has a better high perception, then it's easy. It's harder to sneak by him.
It's like stealth versus perception.
Oh, right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but like for the skill checks, it's up to you to decide what it is. And as you've been playing, you get a little bit more handle on what you want. But I think there's enough guides out there that if you just Google stuff, like, or even in there in the skill description in the DM guide, I think they have it like based on here's the things you can do for survival. Here's about the difficulties for each thing. Tracking a person in snow is easier than tracking somebody in a desert.
Yeah, and as you so that's the tactical of how to resolve those things. And there, like Billy said, there's tons of guides. I think also helpful is when do you use them is like the other half of that, and that's going to be your DM's call. So if the character is doing something that's just kind of like ordinary, or it's not overly difficult, I just don't require those things, because they do kind of slow the game down. It's kind of when you get into those more, I don't know, like fantastic things, or things that just require a lot more skill, concentration, focus, or strength, or it needs to be a contest or check against something, where I start actually making characters roll stuff.
Yeah.
So like if a character walks into the room and I describe the room, that's just what you see. But if you want to see something specific, then it's a perception check. Or if you want to like look for a clue, then it's investigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
What was your question?
Perfect sense. That was basically it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm also, wondering if that's a way also to help the party, if there is a very important piece of information that kind of needs to be found, maybe offering a check that somebody's a little bit better on, if there's, several that might fit.
Yeah.
So that people don't miss something, or you don't have to like be like, oops, you were supposed to get that scroll because it had, this detail on it.
One of the most important things to think about when you're doing any check is that there's a possibility that they fail. That is number one. You need to think, like, if there's no chance of them failing this, don't roll.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're having them roll, even if you think that it's a gimme, there's a chance that they fail it. And if you just give it to them anyway, then then you shouldn't have had them roll it. So if they're climbing up a ladder, climbing up a rope, and there's no chance of them not being able to climb up that rope, don't make them do an athletics check. But if it's in the middle of combat and they're trying to climb up that rope quickly and they could slide back down, there's no, have the check there. But like if there's no consequences to failure, then the roll should not be. So that's the rule.
Yep.
But always consider, if you are going to do a roll, that there should be consequences to those failure. And even if it is a gimme, but a natural one, at least in my games, a natural one always fails a check. I do not agree that even if if you have a plus 20 on your skill check and it's a 7, unless you have like the thief's reliable skill or something like that, reliable talent, whatever their ability is, you can always a ballroom dancer can trip on the sidewalk.
It's just a critical fail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless,
anybody can fail at any task at any time, and if there's no consequences for failing, and you just have to redo it again, don't even have them do the roll. But yeah, if you're going to do that thing where it's a key piece of information and you're going to give them an ability check, just think about it. They could fail that roll, and then do they not get that key piece of information, or you do get that key piece of information another way?
Right.
Yeah.
And a critical fail doesn't necessarily have, you get to choose what the failure is, like whether it, you don't fall down and hit your head and die necessarily.
And sometimes it's fun to let the players choose the punishment too. And there's some game systems that actually allow that. I think, was it Monster of the Week? But essentially, like you take punishment, or you can, and if the players are playing a good role playing game, it shouldn't be a problem. But if players are like, I don't know, metagaming, or they're more about just being superheroes, it might not work.
Yeah, if they gave themselves flaws that aren't actual flaws, like I'm too detail oriented, then they're probably not going to give themselves, true fumbles.
My weakness is I'm too strong.
Yeah, exactly. So if they're not, but with all of us, we make compelling characters that have flaws. Flaws make a character interesting, vis-a-vis Superman, versus, the Marvel characters that are all human.
Yeah.
But I think you're right in that it's kind of fun. Like, okay, what happens? Like, you give them the ability to say if they rolled a crit and how you kill that thing. Tell them like, okay, you done goofed. What did you do? Like, did you stub your toe? Did you trip? Did you drop something? Did you knock yourself out? Did you get winded? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun way to balance the role playing. I also, and I think we do this in our games, but I want to mention it explicitly. I think we're all pretty good. Like, what you have to roll survival or nature. I'll let you pick. As a DM, I give those players some of those choices. Sometimes because I kind of forget categorically where things fall, but sometimes I want to let the players, like, I want to give them the options to role play and use the skills that they feel is most appropriate for their characters. So that's one thing I like to leave that open and kind of give the players maybe some options, if they want to, if it makes sense.
Yeah, and let them explain why they should be able to use that skill. If they want, if you say, okay, give me a survival check, and they're like, I like to use nature. Why? Yeah, interesting. Tell me why your nature. How are you going to use your nature skill for this survival check? Oh, well, it's in the freaking woods, and I can tell when this path is not natural. Or okay, cool. Or something like that. Or and they could do it. It could be like the most random roll, and they're like, I think that I could use my sleight of hand check instead of a diplomacy check. And I'm like, how's that? Like, I'm going to try to steal this guy's wallet and read information so I can come up to him like, oh, Steve Jameson? Is that you? That's not a deception. He got that information because he stole his dang wallet. Like, cool, interesting. Go with that. So I agree, Chris. I agree 100%.
Yes, and as long as they can make a compelling argument to one way or the other, I don't care. Yeah. I just want to hear that the logic is there.
Yeah,
And then if there's something that's like, if they're going up and above and beyond to do something cool, then I give advantage. Like, yeah, you can do that. Plus you get advantage on that because that's really cool, or that was really interesting.
Reward for good decisions, good storytelling, or just good use of knowing their characters.
Yeah.
Like and not just good storytelling, but just a very unique and creative solution should be rewarded.
Yeah, and I think like inspiration is a great way to do it. But even if the party's got inspiration and they're not using it, just throwing in an advantage. Yeah, you can do that with advantage. That's another just simple and awesome reward that you can give and to encourage. That's my philosophy. Like, I like to reinforce good role playing, and you guys always deliver. So that's a little tactic that you can use to kind of navigate those different ability checks. Did that answer your question, Mark? We talked about like with regards to ability checks, we talked a lot. Do we actually resolve or answer what you wanted?
Yeah, and that's in detail, because I kind of got the impression just from seeing how everybody runs things that it was a combination of, there's some things are just prescribed by the game and other things are flexible, which is the whole point of, role-playing games. But I think especially those examples really help. That definitely answers my question. There's definitely going to be things that are easy and obvious,
and there's always things that are going to come up.
Roll was a good trick. Like if you're going to jump over a ravine versus jumping out of a trap, like a pit dug in the ground, those are very different things.
Yeah.
So no, that all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
And don't be afraid to wing it, because sometimes not everything's planned. If the characters do something that you don't know, I sometimes don't even have like a DC in my head. It's all based on how cool is the item and how good their roll is. If they do a poor roll, they're going to fail. If they do a great roll, they're going to succeed. And if they do a medium roll, but they described it better, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, you do it. Like, that's, have like a set DC for my head is like 12. 12 is a good standard DC.
Yeah, once you learn like the kind of scales and frameworks of things like the DC or difficulty challenge? That's just like, how hard is this thing to do? You kind of like what a low level, mid level, and high level challenge would be. And then that can help you make those quick snap decisions. It takes time, but I think an advanced DM tip is like when you have some of the rule shortcuts in your head memorized, like kind of like ability check is this plus this, easy, or just how to like resolve certain things quickly. I think the more of those that you have trained, I guess, or they become kind of secondhand, will help I don't know. I like to get the rules out of the way as much as possible to focus on actually playing. So it takes some time, but eventually you kind of learn those little shortcuts, I guess.
I agree. And as long as you can do it fluidly and they don't, it's more fun to do that, even if you're fudging some numbers, than to like pause everything for a minute while you go back and look through the book to see if that's the correct DC, and
right.
if they're right on the fence, you're like, oh, well, let me double check. I don't actually know if it's a 13 or a 12. Just, was there something cool? Give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Like, nobody's going to come back and be like, I actually, breaking open a wooden door with iron supports is actually a strength check of 13. Shut up, dude. Like,
how dare
no
you?
no one in our game is gonna do that. Some people are like the rules lawyers, and they will, but you're just like, yeah, but this one actually had a little bit of rust on it, so it was a little easier. Done.
I know there was corrosion.
Yeah. You're the DM. You made the rules, dude. You can't make the rules wrong. The only way you can do it is being inconsistent, which we talked about earlier. But yeah.
Awesome, Mark. Any other questions you have?
No, I feel like all of my fears of running a game have been put to rest. I feel ready to start researching and figuring it out.
Well, that makes me super happy. And maybe we could do a follow-up episode of like reskinning adventures if you truly do want to do like a Star Wars themed D&D adventure. Again, no pressure for you to do that. But
yeah, I
that
think
could
it would be
fun.
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that wraps up our episode on DM tips. Hope you guys learned a lot. I know it was fun talking about those things. I also learned stuff. I just think it's always great to share. And also looking forward to the game that Mark runs in Candlekeep Mysteries and applying some of the stuff that you learned here today. It'll be cool to see those play out.
For sure. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for having me again, as always.
Heck yeah. It was fun.
May the force be with you.
May the force be with us always.
May the Schwartz be with you.
Oh, the Schwartz. I gotta watch Spaceballs.
Can't go wrong with Spaceballs.